what is the one thing that sets Buddhism apart from all the other religions? Well, there can be many different answers. No soul, no creator God, so on and so forth. But to me, actually, the one thing is the freedom of inquiry. So what do we mean by this? It means in Buddhism, as opposed to other religions, as opposed to other teachings, blind faith is not required. In fact, it's discouraged. So in Buddhism, questioning and investigating is actually encouraged. The reason is so that we can make our own decisions about the path we want to take for ourselves. In other words, not people telling us what to do, but we decide for ourselves. So blind faith is actually discouraged. Questioning and investigating is encouraged. To me, this is what sets Buddhism apart from all the other religions, because I'm sure some of you may know, for most of the other religions, they will say, don't think for yourself, don't ask questions, just believe, can already. Buddhism is totally the opposite. The more questions you ask, the more you investigate, the better, right? So blind faith is discouraged, questioning and investigating is encouraged. I'm sure you all know from your own experience, if you all have followed other teachings or other religions. So the basis of this is something called the Kalama Sutta. Okay, I'm going to start with this sutta because I think it's one of the most important teachings in Buddhism that teaches you to think for yourself. So what is Kalama Sutta? I think some of you may already know about it, but for the people who are new, let's go into it, and I'm sure for the people who are familiar with this already, you can maybe get different angles on it. So okay, the background to the Kalama Sutta is actually the Buddha visiting this village called Kesaputta and greeted by the people who live there. They were called the Kalamas, that's why it's called the Kalama Sutta. So these people, when the Buddha came to visit, told him that, a lot of holy men, ascetics, religious teachers passed through the village. They always expound their own teachings and, of course, say the teachings of the other people are wrong. So they always say, my teachings are right, the others are wrong, don't listen to the others, just follow mine will do. So when the Buddha came along, so the Kalamas asked the Buddha who actually they should follow. Okay, before I go into that, let's go into this place called Kesaputta. A lot of people may wonder whether in Buddhism really got all these places or not, where really got all these people or not. So I found out that actually this place called Kesaputta is now called Kesariya. It's a small state in India. So in fact they discovered that a stupa there. The stupa is a construction, a building where sometimes they put the Buddha's relics, the Buddha's remains, or maybe the relics or the remains of some of the other Buddhist holy people. So they just discovered this stupa quite recently in 1998. So they found out it's actually the largest and tallest Buddhist stupa in the world, slightly even higher than the Borobudur stupa in Indonesia. Here, this is a map of India. This is basically where the Buddha operated, this area in India. And this is a state called Bihar. This is a picture of the stupa. So it's brand new in the sense that very few people know about it. And of course, the tourists haven't come yet, so you can see how it looks like. Okay, so coming back to the story. The Buddha told the Kalamas, it is right to doubt and to ask questions. In other words, he's again saying, think for yourself. So he did not say, forget about the others, you believe in me, can really. So instead, the Buddha told them the proper way to discover the truth. The Buddha did not say, just follow me, don't listen to the others. He told them how to discover the truth for themselves. So therefore, the Kalama Sutta is known as the Buddhist Charter of Free Enquiry. So what happens is this, the Buddha teaches the people, don't rely on other people's sayings without looking further into what they tell you. So he's saying, do not rely on these few points without further verification. So in other words, you listen to people, fine, but then if something doesn't sound very right, ask questions, doubt, investigate further. So what are these points? Firstly, oral history or divine revelations. I think throughout all history, many of these have been wrong. For example, throughout history, a lot of people say the end of the world is coming. I think some of these people, especially in America, Jehovah's Witnesses, a group called the Millerites, they always predict the world is coming to an end, and then these people sell all their houses, and in the end the world never comes to an end, then they get into problem. So therefore, the Buddha says, don't depend on the divine revelation. The other thing the Buddha says is tradition. Don't rely so much on tradition. One of the traditions in Singapore, for the Chinese especially, burn joss stick. So everywhere you see all the temples burn joss stick. Chinese here, everywhere all burn joss stick. But actually, is it a Buddhist tradition or not? Some of the people might say, yeah, it's a Buddhist tradition, we just follow lah. But should we really follow? Follow all the joss stick, Chinese New Year? All queue up, stampede, be the first one to put the joss stick in the urn. So is this really tradition we should follow? Well, quite messy, like you can imagine people crowding and all that. And also, not only joss stick, big joss stick. So, there's Jackie Chan, there's Andy Lau. So all this big joss stick tradition. This joss stick, or bigger one. All this. So this tradition not necessarily must follow, because number one, it creates a lot of pollution. It's dirty, it's filthy and all that. So luckily, a lot of the temples now, even if the joss sticks put outside, not so much pollution, not so dusty and so on and so forth. So the things the Buddha said, also not to rely on reports or rumors. Some of you may be following some of these financial markets. Gold price recently went up $1,000 over. So there's this guy called George Soros. I'm sure most of you may know about him. One of the great speculators, investment managers, multi-billionaire. So just a short while ago, in fact last month, January, George Soros says, gold is ultimate bubble. It's very high. It may crash. Then, this is January, right? Next he says, in February, George Soros is actually buying gold. So 1 minute he say, oh, it's too high. But actually behind he's buying gold. So, well, is he telling the truth or not? So this is something which you can investigate for yourself. Don't rely on all these reports and rumors. So very naughty 1 minute say, hey, gold is too high, but behind he's actually buying. So common trick in the financial markets. Other things, scriptures or holy books, I'm sure you know, distorted, even in Buddhism, not to mention the other religions. Look at it closely for yourself. You know, the holy books tell you, oh, you can do this, do that, and clear your karma just by walking around the stupa blindly and so on and so forth. You have a right to question, you have a right to doubt. So don't just rely on it without further investigation or verification. Logical reasoning. Well, the earth looks flat, but is it? So, previously the people think the earth looks flat. They think it's flat, the ships will fall off the edge of the earth. But of course now we know that it isn't. But some people still believe, you'll be surprised if you search the internet, there's this thing called a flat earth society. They think the round earth is a hoax. So, they still believe the earth is flat. Well, you should investigate further. Philosophical reasoning, another thing you can investigate further. So philosophy basically is different schools of thought. One of the main, or rather major schools of thought now is the schools of thought between communism and capitalism. So we see this is quite a good quote. Communism, man exploiting man. Capitalism, man exploiting man, but the other way around. So we see actually now, China is becoming less following the communism, more capitalistic. The Americans are going the other way around with all the social progress, so on and so forth. So not necessarily one is right, one is wrong. Both are quite extreme. So lucky thing Singapore doesn't follow either too closely. Singapore a bit capitalistic, free market, but Singapore also a bit socialistic. So Singapore follow the middle path, go down middle path. Neither too capitalistic, neither too communistic or socialistic. So it's quite good. So you're quite lucky, we are all quite lucky to be living in Singapore right now. One's own opinions. Don't just follow your own opinions because somebody else agrees with you. For example, let me think. Okay, if you're about to buy a house, then the agent says, yeah, quite good now, market good to buy. So you also think it's good to buy. So you follow, but it may not actually be exactly a good time to buy. So you have to look further. Don't just rely on your own opinion just because it happens to coincide with the opinion of someone else that you happen to meet. Another one, authorities or experts. Authorities, whether we can rely on them 100% or not. A case in point, Iraq war. Bush declares war on Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction. Let's wipe them off because they're going to use weapons of mass destruction, chemical, nuclear, put the whole world in danger. In the end, no weapons of mass destruction. So what happens? A great big mess. So in fact, the whole region is destabilized. See, historically, Iran and Iraq are enemies. So Iraq is actually a check on Iran. But now you destroy Iraq, then Iran becomes very strong. So in fact, the whole region becomes destabilized just because they want to get the oil and so on and so forth. So therefore, not to rely so much on all these so-called authorities. But of course, only some of the time. Mostly, we hope they're quite genuine. Alright, so again, the Buddha says, look into it with investigation, investigate further. One's own teacher. Very important. You see a lot of false gurus, a lot of false monks, all get into trouble. So your teacher also make sure, good teacher, don't get a teacher like this. Nowadays, Thailand, all these amulets, I'm sure Bhante will agree, selling amulets by the thousands of dollars. This monk said to say, the bigger the amulet, the better. Big one, small one, not enough. So the bigger the amulet, maybe $10,000, $20,000, who knows, even $30,000, $40,000. So lucky thing here, UBT, no amulets, right? Okay, good. So you can follow the UBT people here, quite good. So this is one thing you should be aware of is teachers, investigate, ask questions, quite important for yourself, your own practice. So let's go a bit more into this. What is the Buddha actually telling us when we investigate further? Faith. Faith, there's two aspects of faith. One is blind faith, the other one is wisdom faith. What is blind faith? Blind faith is dogmatic, unquestioning. That means you just take it as face value, like a lot of people, a lot of teachings, a lot of religions. Blind faith is important. Don't ask questions, just believe. Wisdom faith, the opposite. Open your mind. Be receptive to either ideas. Like I said, inquire, investigate, ask questions. Obviously, in Buddhism, what we want is wisdom faith, faith with knowledge, faith with understanding, after due investigation and experience for yourself. So the criteria basically for acceptance or rejection, how the Buddha taught the Kalamas, is this: observe, analyze, test it out for yourself. Don't just take it for face value. You ask, does it agree with reason? I'm sure for many of you, some of the teachings of many of these other faiths, on the first part of it already doesn't really agree with reason. Of course, I don't want to go into that too much. You can see this for yourself. If it doesn't agree with reason, well, you may reject it, not necessarily accept it. Next to us. Will it lead to harm or good for yourself or others? Like some of these bombings, suicide bombings, obviously it leads to harm not only for others but for yourself. So these are the extremes. So you can think for yourself on this. Will it lead to suffering or happiness? That's the opposite side. So teachings that bring happiness to yourself, of course, you should try to accept. So finally, will a wise person praise or disapprove of it? Because, sometimes the older people, they may know a bit more about us. But again, you must keep in mind, if you're intelligent, doesn't mean you're wise. If you're old, doesn't mean you're wise. So wisdom is a different thing. So you also have to assess for yourself whether the person really is wise or not. So these are the few things which the Buddha teaches us: how to accept or reject a religion, observe, analyze, test it out, whether it's reasonable, does it agree with reason, will it lead to harm or good, or will it lead to suffering or happiness, will a wise person praise or disapprove of it. If yes, then accept it and live up to it. This is important because if you come across a good teaching, then if you don't accept it, then what's the point? Even if you accept it and you don't live up to it again, what's the point? Right? So you come across a good teaching, accept it and practice it, live up to it. So the Buddha goes on to teach us what are the three things we must avoid. Greed. If a teaching encourages you to be greedy, excessive attachment, so on and so forth, then you have to be careful. If a teaching or religion teaches you hatred, dislike, these people are no good, that people are no good, again, you can ask questions. Delusion. If a teaching confuses you, well, again, you have to be a bit more careful. So in Buddhism, this is called the three poisons for those who are new. Three things you must avoid: greed, hatred, and delusion. And in Buddhism, later on, how we counter this, of course, is, we'll see later. You practice compassion, you practice kindness, you practice meditation to clear yourself from greed, hatred, and delusion. So these are the things you must avoid because they are the cause of harm of others and ourselves and keeps us from peace and happiness. So the Buddha also went on to talk about the four divine abidings. Four divine abidings are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. These are the four Brahma Viharas. Basically what it means is four divine abidings, heavenly realms. In Buddhism, the heavenly realm doesn't mean you go there after you die. You can attain these states in the present life. Let me give you an example. Let's say you go on holiday to the most beautiful 5-star resort in Bali or whatever the case may be. Not necessarily you're enjoying yourself. You may be quarreling with your wife. You may be quarreling with your husband. In that case, is it a nice place? Not really, because you're in hell. On the other hand, some people, they go to these humanitarian trips, maybe in Haiti or in Burma or whatever, horrendous conditions, not enough food, living conditions are really bad. But they are not in hell because they are practicing compassion. They are actually in a heavenly state because their minds are in heavenly state. So this is how the Buddha teaches us to attain these heavenly states right now, right here. So this is also part of the Kalama Sutta. These are the four divine abidings. Metta. This is basically the desire for all sentient beings unconditionally, all beings to be well and happy. Karuna is a bit different. Compassion. It means you wish all beings to be free from suffering. Sympathetic joy, called mudita. This is quite difficult. To be happy and rejoice the virtue, happiness, and success of others. Because it's human nature actually to be envious. Your neighbor touched 4D, touched 10,000. Sure, a bit jealous, right? Your colleague, their promotion, whereas you are still there. Of course, a bit envious. So this is something which you have to cultivate, which is not easy, but it can be done. So in fact, in the English language, there is no single word for this. There's many words to describe this quality. The closest we can find is sympathetic joy. To be happy and rejoice at the happiness and success of others. When you do so, you're actually in a happy state of mind. The fourth one is equanimity. Not to be affected by worldly conditions, because worldly conditions always change. There's always gain and loss. There's always honor and disgrace. There's always praise and blame. There's always pleasure and pain. These are what we inquire every day, every moment of our waking lives. So if we keep getting affected by all these conditions, our mind can never be peaceful. So Buddhism teaches you to be less affected. Of course, to be totally unaffected may be impossible for most of us. Unless you become enlightened, then you'll be totally unaffected. But I think it's really good enough if you can be less affected by all these conditions, then you'll be more peaceful. So the sutta goes on to the four assurances. So the Buddha says, be a good person. If there's an afterlife, if you believe there's a next life, if you do good things, you avoid evil things, so on and so forth, there will be a good rebirth. even if there's no afterlife, if everything ends here, if you practice good, you avoid evil and so on and so forth, obviously your present life, you'll be happy, you won't be so much trouble. You do a lot of bad things, sure, a lot of problem. You do a lot of good things, well, you have your own satisfaction. So, if you believe that there's karma, and you believe that bad things befall those who do harm, and if you don't do bad things, you do good things, well, you'll be safe from harm. So there's your own happiness. So finally, even if there's no rebirth, even if there's no karma, the mere actions of avoiding evil and doing good, I think should give most of us satisfaction. So one is still pure and happy. So these are the 4 assurances that the Buddha gave us to tell us to avoid evil, to do good, and eventually to do a bit of meditation, purify your mind, see things more clearly, such that you will be happy and peaceful, which is what is the purpose of the teachings of Buddhism. So in summary, what actually is the Buddha telling us about the Kalama Sutta? Telling us about intolerance, dogmatism, because if you're intolerant, you only want to see things your own way, you cannot go further, right? So we have to be tolerant and open-minded. Okay, so avoid blind faith. So obviously question and investigate. So these are the teachings of the Kalama Sutta in a nutshell. So be tolerant and open-minded and question and investigate. So, any questions? Yes?
Just now, one of the criteria is about wise people. So how do you assess whether a person is wise or not?
Okay, good question. Brother here is asking, how do we assess whether a person is wise or not? Okay, this is the one, right? So criteria for acceptance or rejection. How do we assess a person whether wise or not? Well, one of the things is through observance. In one of the teachings, the Buddha said, through knowing a person, you just don't know him straight away. You can be deceived, correct? The person may have a lot of possessions, he may drive a big car, he may have expensive possessions. But you drive a big car, not necessarily you're rich. No, you drive a small car, not necessarily you're poor. You drive a big car, some people may have taken a huge loan to pay for it. On the other hand, some people who drive a modest car, they may be very well off. So the point is, don't be deceived by looks, don't be deceived by what people tell you. How you get to know a person is through observation, and not through a short time, but through at least an intermediate time. So not through knowing a person through a few days or a few weeks even. You just observe a person, whether he's wise or not. Does he do good things or do bad things? Does he do good things, or rather does he tell you to do good things and then behind do bad things? Then you know that he's not exactly a wise person or a good person. But if he is consistent, if he tells you to do something good and he himself also does something good, then you can be sure that he's a pretty genuine person. So likewise, a person wise or not, you observe for a while, determine for yourself, observe for yourself whether or not he's a wise person. Then, if he is, then you can take his advice. And so I hope I answered your question. Anyway, that's a good question. It raised a good point because I myself never thought of it. So thanks so much.